Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Book of the Day show. I'm talking with the amazing Adam Braun and his New York Times best-selling book, The Promise of a Pencil. A little bit of warm day here in my backyard, Beverly Hills, California stays nice and toasty these days. This book is going to hit you on multiple levels. It has the potential, I just tell you this, to change your life. Why? Because as you're going to hear, Adam, he's a big believer in not just for-profit business or non-profit, but for purpose. You know, as the old saying goes, what does it profit a man to gain the world and lose his soul? And you can interpret that whether you be religious or not religious, in the sense that a life without purpose, whatever you consider purpose, is basically meaningless. And so we're gonna go in here with Adam's on the line on how he went from, thinking he was going to be in high finance and just making money, to going out, traveling the world, 40 or 50 countries, backpacking, and discovering a purpose from just a poor homeless person in India's words to him, how that changed the trajectory of his life. Talk about his mentors, wise words of wisdom that they gave him that really kept him from taking a job that you'll see turned out to be a company that went bankrupt, and thank goodness they didn't go down that route. So it's just an amazing story. A lot of you know who Adam Braun is. He has Richard Branson here recommending the book, Deepak Chopra. He spoke at the White House. He's spoken multiple times for the United Nations, for the Clinton Global Initiative. So Adam, thanks so much for being on today's call.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Happy to be here.
Got all kinds of good stuff here. Spoke at the White House, the Clinton Global Initiative, United Nations. Was that when Clinton was the president, or?
So I spoke at the United Nations a couple times now, but the Clinton Global Initiative was after he was president, but really when he started to kind of kick off CGI, and they were kind enough to reach out to me and have me participate in the event.
Awesome. So let's just jump right in here. There's this saying, there's the known knowns, that is the things we know, and then there's the known unknowns, the things we don't know, but then there's also the unknown unknowns. And you talk about this line, the single most powerful element of youth is that you don't have the life experiences to know what can't be done. So when you were starting out, did you have any idea it would grow into this big charity and this big movement? And maybe talk a little bit about how you took it from just an idea, because I meet everybody and most people have ideas, but very few people actualize them. Can you just walk us through that?
Sure. So, there were kind of two moments. There was one where I had the idea for the organization. So just to kind of give the brief backstory, I was born in New York. I grew up in Connecticut, and just had a real interest in business, in particular finance, since I was pretty young. I traded basketball cards, and picking stocks kind of seemed like the adult version of that. And so I opened up an E-Trade account when I was 13. I started working at a hedge fund when I was 16. That was kind of fun by the time I was 19. And I was on this fast track to this Wall Street career that I was really excited about. But when I was 21, I went into the developing world for the first time as a study abroad student on the semester at sea program. And when I got to each country that we traveled to, I would ask one child in each country a simple question, and that was, if you could have anything in the world, what would you want most? And when I went to India, the poverty was just the most stark and devastating I had ever seen, and I felt pretty helpless. And that's where I met a street beggar, and I asked him, and his answer, if he could have anything in the world, was a pencil. So I gave him my pencil, he just lit up, and I started asking questions, and I realized this boy had never been to school before in his life. And that was just something that I never considered to be reality. I think growing up in the States, you assume every kid has the opportunity to go to school. Maybe it's a really poor school, maybe it's well attended, or the teachers don't pay attention. But a kid who had never been to school for a day in his life was just kind of unfathomable to me. So I started backpacking and traveling through a lot of different countries, about 40 or 50 in my early 20s, and just kept on living in these communities and seeing how little support they got, but how they had the same level of, I would say, desire and vigor and dignity and humility that anyone else that I'd ever met had, and that my family kind of was in that position 2 generations ago. You know, my grandparents living in the rural countryside of Eastern Europe. And it was through education that things got elevated for my dad to grow up as an immigrant in New York with almost nothing, and then, you know, again, invest in his education and then create a better life for his kids. And, you know, my siblings and I went to great public schools and felt like we had, you know, great opportunities because of it. And so, anyway, I just became really passionate about it. But I started working in New York, and I found myself at a great job. I was working at Bain & Company, arguably the top consulting firm out there. Mm-hmm. And I was watching how all these Fortune 500 companies were being run and learning so much in the process. But at the same time, I felt really frustrated that so little of that for-profit business acumen was actually being applied to the way that nonprofits ran themselves. And so, you know, I volunteered, I participated in different nonprofits, and it always felt like people, you know, just brought a lot of passion to the table, which is important, but they couldn't oftentimes wed that to for-profit business acumen. And so while they could take really pretty photos and tell great stories, they weren't actually producing results. And that's what I heard about most, because that's kind of how I've always viewed the world, and in particular running any business. So my grandma was turning 80 just before my 25th birthday, and I got this idea. Bain lets you go on what they call an externship. It's basically a 6 to 9 month sabbatical. And I pitched them on letting me leave and start something entrepreneurial, and that was called Pencils of Promise. And this is where I can kind of address your question, which is, I know it was going to become a big organization. The fact that I thought of the name of the organization and the idea that I could use the externship and crowdsource the money from friends in increments of, you know, 20 or 30 bucks, I knew I could pull that off. And most people said it was crazy because this is October 2008, you know, the worst economic period in New York in 50 years, maybe more, since the Great Recession. And so everyone else said it was crazy. But to the quote that you were referencing that I write about in the book, you know, the most powerful element of youth is that you're too young to know what's impossible. Right. And so in that, you're willing to try. And so I didn't realize how impossible it would be. And I was like, I can go for this. I think I can pull it off. And it was really after the very first party, which was my birthday. I just asked friends to get $20 at the door for a birthday party on Halloween when I'm born. And there was one girl in particular who followed up with me and said, I want to get involved. I said, okay, all right. And at this point, it was just a personal project to honor my grandmother and raise the funds on the side of my job, and even put in some of the capital I had saved to personally fund the school. And this girl said, you know, this is exactly what I'm looking for. I work in real estate, but I have relationships to people that do corporate sponsorship for events. I think for our next event, we can get a liquor sponsor and a food sponsor and maybe even a venue sponsor. And I was like, whoa, what do you mean our next event? Like, you want to be a part of this too? Because I thought, you know, everyone just thought I was crazy. And as soon as this one person said to me, yeah, I really believe in it. I mean, her name's Mimi Wen. She'll tell you this exactly. You know, this is probably 6 weeks after the organization was founded. We had $8,000 in our bank account. And I said to her very directly that night, I said, Mimi, if you are willing to invest in this the way that I know I am, and I just have even one other person, I guarantee that there are many others that out there that feel this way, and we will collectively build hundreds of schools together in the coming years. And it was such a ridiculous thing to say back then, but I just knew it would happen. I just absolutely knew it. And everything after that was about putting in the work.
Yeah, it's a great story. I think that you hit on all kinds of points. One of the interesting ones I will talk about a little bit later is the business side of things. And people really misunderstand, I think, when it comes to charity. Most charities misunderstand what business is, so they go, we're not a business, we're a charity, we're not here to make profit. But really, if you know, Peter F. Drucker, the greatest of all business professors and teachers, he says the purpose of a business is never to make a profit. That is a necessity. The purpose of a business is the creation of a customer. And the second the mindset of a business, of a charity, switches to that, then it becomes aligned and realizes it is a business. It's the business in this case. And you generally, in business, have two customers. You have, in the case of a charity, the donors, and then the people that you're giving the money to. But I want to talk on the business a little later. Let's go back to this concept of destiny. A lot of people listening to this, and one of the most common questions, I think, really in the world at large is, what am I doing with my life? Is it something meaningful? And you say something, you know, many of us spend our entire lives in the same bubble. We surround ourselves with people who share our opinions, speak the same way we speak and look the way we look. We fear leaving those familiar surroundings, which is natural. But through exploration of the unfamiliar, we stop focusing on the labels that define what we are, and we discover who we are. And I'm a little like you. I've been lucky enough to go to about 51 countries, and I think that was an integral part. How important for people, in wealthy countries? A lot of people listening. We have 40 countries listening in, but for those of people in the first world countries, how important do you think it is to just get on a plane and make an adventure out of it and just go see India and go see Bangladesh and go see the favelas of Brazil? Do you think that's an integral part in almost every, or should be an integral part in almost every person's life?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the most powerful thing that any individual can really do, besides obviously surround themselves with people who really make them better, is to get outside of their comfort zone. And so there's another line in the book, true self-discovery begins where your comfort zone ends. And I just find that to be so true. But the one thing that I would kind of caveat that with is the idea that getting out of your comfort zone doesn't necessarily have to mean global travel. Oftentimes it can be travel into, the other side of your town where you've never really spent much time. It can also mean trying out new hobbies or activities that you've never done before. So an example of that for me is when I was on semester at sea as a 21-year-old, my whole identity at that point in my life was as a basketball player. I played basketball since I was a kid. I was recruited to play college basketball. As a 21-year-old on semester at sea, my whole identity at that point in time was as a basketball player. I'd been playing basketball my whole life. I was recruited to college for basketball, and suddenly I'm on the ship. And my closest friend on the ship, who had also mainly played sports throughout his life, came up to me pretty early on in the voyage and said, "Hey, do you want to go do improv? This guy's teaching improv classes, and he's creating an improv troupe." And I remember thinking, like, you're out of your mind. I'm an athlete. Athletes don't do drama. We don't act in plays. We don't do improv. But this guy, my closest friend, was up for it. And I felt like, maybe I'll learn something by getting out of my comfort zone. And it was the improv troupe that I ended up joining and literally performing twice, 2 huge shows on our ship to the other students, that eventually gave me the comfort and confidence to become a really effective public speaker. And so anyone who's ever seen me speak at an event knows I don't read from notes. Everything is off the cuff. But that level of comfort was only developed because of getting outside my comfort zone. So, while I would definitely say that a person should prioritize travel, and ideally you can get to remote parts of the world that challenge your way of thinking and, make you recognize how big the world is and how little your little bubble is within it. But at the same time, I think that you can also be creative in finding ways to challenge yourself and get out of your comfort zone.
Yeah. One of my mentors, Joel Salatin, used to always say, you can always bloom where you're planted. Whether you live in a small town or a big city, there's always people in need. I mean, if you go in LA, if you go down to Skid Row, I was down there not too long ago, and it's just like, almost as, I've been to India. It's not quite as poor as India, but there's all kinds of, poverty.
Exactly.
Now, let's talk about, kind of switch gears here to this broad concept, which you touch on throughout the book, about just destiny in general. Some people are going to start for-profit businesses. Some people are going to be entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs, work in someone else's organization. Some people are going to start charities like you've done. How do you think people, or maybe let's start, how did you get that clarity, like, yes, this is me, and how do you think people listening in, some of the good tools to really know with some level of certainty that your life's on the right track in terms of, destiny? Are you doing the career that really fulfills you? Are you with the people that really fulfills you? How do you move your life closer and closer? It's not obviously a black and white where you're like, I'm 100% sure.
Yeah.
What are some ideas you have and that you've learned there?
Yeah. So there's a bunch of different kind of, I would say, tips of the trade that I've shared with people in the past. I think one of them is to truthfully write. So I think that anyone that doesn't have a journal is really losing out on a tremendous tool in self-discovery. And so, my mom was the one who introduced me to the concept of meditation when I was a teenager. And the way that she described it is to say to me that, look, you have this internal voice going on in your head all day long. You think of it as an internal monologue. But the truth is there's actually has to be a speaker and then a listener. And the speaker you can really think of as your conscious. mind, and the listener is the subconscious mind that's kind of catching all of what you're saying. And through meditation, you're kind of slowing down and listening to that subconscious mind. And what I find is if I have a journal and I'm writing freehand, not typing, but actually writing freehand, I care so much about every single sentence, and I write literally for nobody. I write for myself, but all of my journals, I've been writing since I was 16. I write under the expectation that no one will ever see them, ever. But I just write for myself. And what I find is that my kind of internal truth comes out, and I almost end up writing like the kind of voice of my future self to my present, like, hey, Adam, stay true to this, or don't go out and do that. You know that in your heart of hearts, this is the right path. And for some reason, just slowing down and writing freehand in that way has always been a hugely helpful tool for me. A second thing that I would say is, if you think about the people that are really kind of following their sense of purpose or destiny, or why they feel like they're here, they're the type who oftentimes they don't sleep very easily because they're up at night thinking of these big ideas, or they're anxious in the morning. And if you look at your own life and you think about your own kind of work, if you're going to sleep easy and feeling like really content, chances are you're probably not challenging yourself enough. And so that's not to say you should always have sleep problems, but you know that you've found that thing when you have this kind of almost manic level of internal excitement about it, that it keeps you up late at night and wakes you up early in the morning, and you can't wait to get to address that thing because you're just constantly coming up with ideas. And then a third thing that I would say is, truthfully, I think people rarely display tremendous vulnerability in asking others for feedback. And so something that I really consistently do is I ask the people that I'm closest to in my life, whether that's family members or coworkers or my closest friends, if I can spend quality time with them alone, and then I'll prepare a series of questions that I'd like them to answer. Things like, what do you wish I did differently, or what do you need and want from me, or how can I be the best friend or sibling, or whatever it might be to you. And then what should I do differently in my life, and what do you think makes me most come alive? What path should I be pursuing? And when you start to get, I would say, objective, but somewhat subjective in that they know you so well, advice, it kind of reflects back onto you all these truths that were there all along, but sometimes they're just kind of living in your blind spot.
Yeah, there's an ancient proverb that says, make war with a multitude of counselors. So it's like, you go out, life is a little bit like war. We have conflicts internally, externally, with other humans, with life in general, and aging and time. And so the President of the United States has a cabinet, and most people don't have a cabinet. And it makes all the difference in the world to have a bouncing board and go. Now, the key caveat there is only surround yourself as cabinet members, so to speak, with people that deserve to be listened to, in terms of not from a respect standpoint, but for they've earned the right. They've done things. I always say, try to find people that are doing what you want to do, but they're 10 to 20 years ahead of you. These are the mentors. Did you have some mentors, and who were they that you really look back and go, thank God I met these people, because without Bob, Susie, I would have gone down a totally different track?
Yeah, so, I, like you, am a huge fan of finding mentors. I mean, it's incredibly valuable. So I, at all times, have multiple mentors in my life. And one thing that I think people don't realize is as much as you can kind of seek out mentorship, at the end of the day, mentors pick their mentees. It's not the other way around. I find that mentors have to kind of make the choice to invest in that individual, and partially because they see returns in their own life, but more because they see huge value in that person becoming, the best version of themselves. So, my first mentors were my parents. My mom, on kind of the side of integrity, it's her favorite word, and not to say that my dad doesn't have it, but my mom just holds that above all else. And then my dad has really good business sense, and he's just the type of person who wears his emotions and his thoughts on his sleeve. And so I know if I ask him a question, he's going to tell me the truth, whether I want to hear the truth or not. He's going to tell it to me like it is. So it starts with, in the household, and that includes my brother and my sister as well. Both have been, hugely valuable to me. But I would say in my career, a lot of the members of the Truthfully Promise board really started out as people that I sought advice from, and then started to become very clear mentors. And then I built my board at top over the years as almost like a council of mentors who now are no longer loyal to me; they're loyal to the organization. So you talk about, the president having a cabinet. I can think of that as like, my professional board of directors. But I think people can have like a personal board, right? That holds you accountable and, helps you set goals, all these things. So I write about one of mine in the book. His name is Ray Chambers. And Ray is a businessman who essentially created leveraged buyout in the modern private equity industry, retired close to a billionaire, I believe, if not a billionaire, and decided that he wanted to use his life in humanitarian interests towards public service. And so he co-founded America's Promise with Colin Powell, among many of the things that he's done. But he's now the UN Special Envoy for Global Health. So he's responsible for getting the world to achieve the Millennium Development Goals around health. And he's just this kind of incredible sage-like figure who, I kind of felt honored just to be in a room with him the first time that we met. And for one reason or another, he kind of chose me to take on as a mentee. And Ray just has so much wisdom. And I think one of the things that we connect on is this idea that you can kind of use the best of the business world to impact a mission, a humanitarian mission that you deeply care about. And, he's the first, even if I check in with him once a year, that one time a year that I check in with him can completely transform, how I'll operate for the next 6 to 12 months.
Fascinating. Yeah, it's interesting as you really, I like to read and study people who have done big things throughout history. And in it, I just finished this book called The Liberator about General Felix. He's one of the heroes of World War II. And sure enough, you dissect the story. There's a mentor taught him courage in the face of fire. And humans, there's a good book called Social by a professor from UCLA, Harvard guy. He says, the human brain is basically designed from a scientific standpoint to learn socially. So we have this idea, I think, the famous poet that said, no man is an island. We tend in the modern world, because of the way the media portrays people like Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates as these lone islands of genius, which there is an element of truth to that. But when you really dissect the story, for example, if you ask Bill Gates, he said, I never did anything alone. And so your life becomes, in some ways, the accumulation, or the quality of your life is basically the cumulative total of the quality of these mentors, this personal. I tell people, you can get a personal board of directors. What you do is you say, you reach out to some people that know you ideally and that you admire, and you say, you don't want to come after them too aggressively. You say, hey, I'd love to get your advice sometimes. Maybe once or twice a year I could take you out to dinner. And I've got a few smart people in the city. Maybe I could take you out to dinner once a year. I'll pay and just run some ideas by you. And if you come off, not desperate, a little nonchalant, if you talk to every 3 people, one of them will say yes. And then you say, oh, and by the way, I've got a couple other smart people at this dinner. You mind if we all come together? There'll be 8 of us. You do that twice a year, and you do it consistently. And the next thing you know, it's your life. It's like the Robert Frost, the path in the woods, and he took the path less trodden on, and it makes all the difference in the world. And just having some smart people go, I always tell people say, what's the best advice somebody ever gave you? I said, well, sometimes the best advice you ever get from mentors, 3 words, don't do it. And sometimes it's the opposite, definitely do it. So what do you think, looking back, what was 1 or 2 of the greatest pieces of advice you ever got to start this charity, Pencils of Promise, and also for you to find, and really feel fulfilled about what you're doing in life?
Yeah, so this is advice from somebody, 2 pieces of advice, actually. So one was right around the time that, actually I can even think of 3 that were just really transformative for me, and this is thinking back over the last decade plus. One of them was right when I was coming out of college. I was, like every other college student trying to find a job, right? And fortunately, I had this strong resume and I could line up interviews at top investment banks, top consulting firms, and private equity firms as well. And so I ended up with 2 job offers. Some people made offers, a lot didn't. But fortunately, I had one at one of the top investment banks and one at one of the top consulting firms. And almost every single friend of mine and family member said, you've got to take the investment banking job because there's more money. And back then, it was about probably $40,000 to $50,000 of potential higher salary, including a bonus, for the investment banking job. Now, in my mind, that was like all the money in the world, right? As a 23-year-old, that was a game-changing amount of money in my life. And so I also kind of felt like maybe I should take this investment banking job. But I spoke to this one CEO who was becoming a mentor. His name is George Book. And George said to me, look, Adam, I'm going to give you some counterintuitive advice. Everyone else is probably telling you to take the banking job because it's more money. What I would tell you is to remove money from the equation and only take the job where you believe you will learn the most. And I was kind of surprised by that. I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, in the first part of your career, the only thing that I think you should prioritize is mastery. You should learn as much as you can and go to a place where it feels like paid business school. So they're paying you and you're learning. And treat it like paid business school, and I guarantee you that it will give you the opportunity to make more in the future. And there will be a time and place in your life where you should actually choose the money. You'll have one job that there's an offer versus another offer. There's going to be a time and place to choose the money, but do it when the margin is much bigger. He said, when you're in your 40s, the difference between one job and another might be a couple $1 million. That at that point maybe it makes sense, but right now, trust in the grand scheme of your life, don't let that $40,000 to $50,000 take you from one job to the other. And so I ended up taking the job at Bain Consulting, which pays less. And ironically, a year later, the company that had offered me the banking job was Lehman Brothers. And Lehman Brothers declared bankruptcy.
Wow.
Almost a year to the day afterward, and went out of business. And so not only did I choose the job that learned more, but I ended up actually choosing the job or if I'd gone with the job with more that paid higher, I would have been out of work. Yeah. So that was a huge learning lesson. And eventually, when I went to pursue Pencil of Promise, and I started it, and then I had to make this choice between do I stay at Bain or do I go pursue the Promise full time? Again, it was the same choice. I mean, my starting salary at Pencil of Promise was 1/3 of what I was expecting to make at Bain that year. Literally a third. So anyone out there, imagine your salary and then imagine it cut it in third. It was pretty tough. But I thought about the learning, and even if Pencil of Promise failed, which I knew it wouldn't, I would have been the #1 executive at hopefully fast-growing organization. I felt like I would have learned more in that position than where I had reached in my Bain trajectory, because my learning curve was slowing down. So that was one piece of hugely impactful advice from a mentor. A second one, to share really quickly, was a guy that I met right after we had opened up the first school. I was backpacking through Southeast Asia, getting this first school underway, and my visa expired now, so I had to leave and come back. And when I left, I ended up in Bali, and I met this serial entrepreneur named Sherry. And I said to him, hey, I'm just starting this organization, but I think it's going to have huge legs. What's your best advice? And he said to me, always stay guided by your values, not your necessities. And again, I asked him to unpack it. He was like, look, if you have a fast-growing company, you're going to get offered a lot of stuff. You're going to think you need certain things. You're going to want to make certain hires. You're going to, do what it takes to get it to succeed. But I can tell you, never sacrifice your values. Always stay guided by those over your necessities. And then the third piece of advice was right after we had, finished probably around 30 schools. I got a chance to speak to the CEO of Saatchi & Saatchi, which I write about in the book, Kevin Roberts. He blogged about us. I kind of tracked him down. I had maybe 25 minutes to talk to him. And the last thing he said to me, I said, can we speak again in a few months? And he said, I'll tell you what, let's talk when we reach 100 schools. And at that point in time, 100 was almost unfathomable to me. I thought, hey, it's taken us almost 2.5 years to get to 35. This guy's basically saying, in my mind, I'm not going to talk to you for another 3 years. And I said, you're sure 100? I mean, that's kind of far off. And he said, no, you're going to get there a lot sooner than you realize. Always always make the little decisions with your head and the big ones with your heart. And I remember writing that down. I put it up on my wall, and we set up a goal to reach 100 schools within 18 months, and we did it.
Wow, that's amazing. So the charity, the way it works, you take the money, It's not literally, because some people might get confused, it's not literally just providing pencils. You're building an
No.
educational whole system, schools,
Yep.
books. Are you providing, helping teachers and things like that too?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, you can think of us as an education company, right? I mean, the name Truthfully kind of harkens back to the origin story with this boy in India, but we do a number of things. So we're most known for building schools. We've built just over 300 schools around the world. We focus in 3 countries, Laos, Ghana, and Guatemala. So we wanted to develop a model that could be proven to work in each of the 3 major poverty zones, Asia and Africa and Latin America. And so that's why we work in those 3 countries, one per major poverty zone to prove that the model can work in each. So we have just over 300 schools. We work very, very closely with local education ministries. And so we have about 100 full-time staff. Most of our staff is in-country. 95% of our staff in-country is from the country in which they work.
Okay.
So we have a lot more Guatemalan staff or Ghanaian staff and, Laotian staff than we do New Yorkers or Americans. There's about 15 here in New York that oversee all of the global operations, but around 30 or so per country. And they work directly with the education ministry. We go out, we source the villages of greatest need, but also where the impact would be the greatest. And then they have to commit to about 20% of the funding for every school. Because education doesn't work when it's a gift, when it's a handout. The individual has to work for it themselves. So it's a co-investment model where these communities are made up of individuals who are usually living in mud huts or bamboo huts or corrugated tin shacks. And so they don't have the money between the full community to make up 20% of the funding, let alone 100. So they make it up in materials and labor. And so it's about $25,000. That's our price point. So for $25,000, anybody out there that might be listening to this, you reach out to me. My email is adam@ipromise.org. So you can just reach out to me, adam@ipromise.org. Let me know that you're interested in building a school, and I can connect in with our team. But that enables us to build the school with the community providing most of the labor, the mothers, the fathers, the siblings, and the elders. And then once the school opens, that's when the work really starts for us. So we have a really big program around teacher training and support, and then a really big program around technology and innovation in the classroom. And so we do a ton of testing, a ton of monitoring and evaluation, and we're developing a really exciting e-reader program as well, where we're seeing incredible results with our students.
So you're pushing kind of the envelope, testing new techniques in terms of, I think that the education that people are going to have 20 years from now is not going to look like the education people had in the 1950s. So you guys are testing any, as we kind of close up this segment, any things you see that you're pioneering or leading the way in new ways of educating kids? Some of the stuff that's happening in schools around the world is pretty archaic.
Yeah, so I couldn't agree with you more. In my opinion, and many people in the education system acknowledge this, that, education really hasn't changed since the model was developed several hundred years ago. And it was, developed for an industrial economy. And so, you put all the kids in one classroom together, they all learn the same exact thing, and then the bell rings and they move to the next subject. It's almost like an assembly line. Right. It was the way at the time to reach mass education. Now that we've reached mass education and we're living in an information economy and an internet economy, there's an ability to personalize education and to tailor it to the true preferences and skills and abilities of students. And so, our goal at Truthfully Promise is to really push the envelope and help develop the future of education. Yeah. If you look at the history of innovation, it rarely happens, in the entrenched environment. It always kind of happens on the outskirts, in what are considered low-value consumers. And next thing you know, you kind of topple the entrenched industry. Instagram over Kodak is like a great example of that, right?
Right.
And you see a lot of things like that happen. Airbnb and hotels. It happens all the time. So
Uber and taxis.
We look at where we work. Yeah, perfect. So we look at where we are working, and we're on the outskirts, right, with the perceived low-value consumers. So what that means is, much like in the same way that you couldn't really try out a lot of innovation in a classroom in New Jersey because you have really strong teachers unions and you have government-created programs that pour tons of money into very structured initiatives that are committed for 10 years, whereas the rate of acceleration in education is nonstop, and every 6 months there's something new. So we look at where we are, and it's very low cost. The adoption is very high, and the scalability is enormous. And so we're really kind of testing out what we believe can be the future of education, and centered around a couple things in our mind. One of them is really student-centered learning, and so not just making it the same thing for every child, but making sure that each kid has the content and the support to pursue an educational path that applies to their learning abilities. A second is making sure that students are able to act as teachers on occasion. So, I learned in college by studying and then essentially kind of splitting up the class, and then before exams, I would kind of teach half the course to one of my friends, and he or she would teach the other half to me. And when you're the teacher, you really master the content. And then the third thing that I've kind of pointed to pretty frequently is that in the American education system, you always hear kids being told to sit still and pay attention. Whereas brain activity, when you look at all the data, suggests that when you have motion, even for as little as 15 or 20 minutes, the brain learns much better after that motion. Huh. So, in the developing world, between classes, kids get up and they go outside and they go swimming in the river, or they climb trees, and then they come back. And that's actually much better for cognitive abilities than just having kids sit still for 7 hours a day. And so these are all things that we're exploring and hope we can start to change, not just abroad, but at home as well eventually.
Yeah, without a doubt, I think that some of the reason the education system is the way that it is because there was constraints on the way you taught 100 years ago. Just like I just finished Henry Ford's autobiography. There was constraints on how you built. You couldn't build just in time like modern factories could do, because back then you had to get a whole bunch of steel and build a whole bunch of cars ahead of time. There weren't the robotics and so on. And what's happened is, for whatever reasons, you hit on some of those entrenched reasons, we haven't gone, look, we do not live in 1842. We can personalize very easily what people learn. We can do psychometric tests. So we go, this kid is probably not going to be a mathematician, but they're brilliant at, dance. And then you get them dancing 4 hours a day. And it's not as hard to do. Obviously, there still needs to be some level of, you need some uniformity so it's not complete chaos in a classroom. But now let's switch here to a very specific subject. I'm interested to hear, and you touched on this a little bit in your talking about how you took the job when you were offered $50,000 more by the then thriving Lehman Brothers, soon to be defunct 2008 victim of the crash. But you were given this advice, don't focus on knowledge. And I've founded this kind of movement called Knowledge Society, where I feel like we've moved past the information society and now we're in the knowledge, the applied information. So thank you so much, Adam. If people want to buy your book, it's of course available at all the big bookstores, Barnes & Noble, Brookstones, Amazon. If they want to reach out, what's the best way to follow you and to give to Pencils of Promise, the charity?
Yeah, so I'm really accessible. My email is just adam@promise.org. So I always tell people to just straight email me. You can check out more of my stuff on my website, where I write a ton of blogs at adambraun.com. And then the book is called The Promise of a Pencil. As mentioned, it's at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all major retailers. And then the organization is pencilsofpromise.org. And so you can just go to the website, check out what we do, and we have a new program right on the homepage called Passport. That's a new monthly community where every single month, through small contribution, you can transform the lives of some of our students. So that's pencilsofpromise.org/passport. And on Twitter, I'm at Adam Braun. Instagram and Snapchat, it's at @Braun.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Adam. It's been a real pleasure and honor to have you on this Book of the Day show. And everybody, make sure you pick up this book. It's you got to read books of people doing big things, but big things not just measured by big things for themselves, but big things for society at large. And so thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.